Joining me still today, editor of Spiked Online, Tom Slater. Thank you very much for joining us. Genuinely, I'm going to talk to Carl Hennigan to give a little bit. He's going to calm me down on the COVID thing. This is the reason why we needed a proper COVID inquiry, isn't it? To actually go, none of these things actually work. There's no evidence for a lot of the mad things, and that's why they weren't in the pandemic plan, whether it was flu or whether it was COVID or any other disease. It wasn't going to work, and therefore, or any other similar disease. And yet we've got health experts and teachers who haven't got a clue what they're doing, telling kids, oh, you can't sing in assembly. Literally, the claim about singing comes from a completely and utterly debunked one-off, experiment or something, or a claim that it was kids singing in a choir that had spread the disease. This is insanity.
No, it's one of those things, isn't it, where people just caught the hypochondriac / authoritarian bug during lockdown, and they've struggled to shake it off.
And a mask looks like it should work, and therefore it must work.
No, exactly.
But it
makes
doesn't
sense.
work.
Like a hair shirt, or like crucifix or something to ward off the devil. This is basically what we're talking about here. It's sort of superstition, really masquerading as science. In a way, I was, up until I saw this story, relatively encouraged that it felt like a lot of places had sort of shaken this off a little bit. You didn't really see too many people wandering around in those useless masks around this time of year. But it didn't take much to make them snap back into it, did it?
There have been at least 3 masks on my tube to and from work every day in the last couple of weeks. I have actually got a little bit of a cough at the moment, and I have to say I may or may not have coughed a little bit more because I'm a terrible human being. No, I am. I'm sorry, but if you're that worried...
They've got their masks on, so they'll be fine.
Well, exactly.
Bulletproof.
Exactly. Don't. It's so painful. Let's get back to more of the infuriating stories of the day. We've got 2 asylum seekers from Afghanistan, so illegal migrants who've arrived in this country, and they have been convicted and jailed yesterday for raping a schoolgirl, forcing her to commit oral sex on them. Traumatic experience, 15-year-old, her first sexual experience, she said, absolutely traumatised her, as you can imagine. These 2 young men, both 17, Jan, I'm assuming it's Jan or Jan, Yahin Zab and Isra Niyazab, both 17. They'd arrived just months earlier in small boats, and because we are so insane in this country, we go, oh, they're children. Let us give them asylum and put them in a hotel or a house, paying for their rent and all their costs. And then on May the 10th, they assaulted the 15-year-old, dragged her, and she thankfully had her phone on and filmed a lot of it. She dragged her into a park and forced her to commit the sex act on them. She was shown in the video weeping, screaming help, begging not to be taken to the park. They had no doubt at all that what they were doing was not what she wanted. She wasn't willing. Oh, I thought she was interested. The judge made it very clear that you knew. I accept you come from a place that has significant cultural differences from the UK. However, I don't accept that either of you does not understand the concept of consent. But then she says, you've betrayed the interests of those like you who come here fleeing harm and seeking safety, and for that you should feel a deep and lasting sense of shame. Bearing in mind that they came from France and paid people smugglers. And by the way, at 17, I'm sorry, you're basically a man in Afghanistan. Who are we kidding? Yeah. I mean, girls are married off at bloody 6, 8 years old in this country. They've thankfully been convicted. Thankfully, she had the video, and that would have helped convict. We've also now got another case. Now, this case there's a charge. It's going to appear in court this morning. This case has not come to court. People have a presumption of innocence. We need to stick to that. That is why we are a civilised country. Maybe it'll go to a jury. Yeah, we used to be a civilised country and allow juries for all these cases. But a man has been charged with the rape of 2 teenage girls in Bolton over the weekend. An Afghan national, Sultani Bakatash, 28 years old, charged with 2 counts of rape of a girl aged under 16, 1 count of sexual assault and another count of assault by penetration. He was arrested in the early hours of Sunday, remanded in custody. Now, what is interesting about this is that we know that this is an Afghan national. We don't know whether or not he's arrived here illegally or not. But the other case, the 2 17-year-olds, the court had actually refused to allow them to be identified as Afghan nationals or as asylum seekers. The defence had actually said they didn't want anyone to know they were asylum seekers, but also said that if that video was shown of her attack, there would be, uproar on the streets. What does that tell us about the attitude these people have towards the general British public?
Well, I think they've got contempt for our safety and they've got contempt for our concerns, and that's what gets repeated time and time again. It's been obvious to anyone who's been paying attention that if you have a free-for-all at your border, if you basically turn a blind eye to illegal migration, that you're, particularly when it's coming from particular countries which have deeply misogynistic cultures, and that's not to damn everyone coming from those countries, but you know, if you read a report by Amnesty International or some preening human rights group, they would tell you about the way in which rape is not properly
women
prosecuted
aren't
in a
allowed
country
out of
like
the
Afghanistan.
house.
I mean,
they're not allowed to speak or to sing,
you would read about women who are raped in a country like Afghanistan and then are punished for being so victimised that they are the subject of honour killings as a consequence of that. This is something that surely has to factor into our discussions, particularly when people are entering the country illegally. There's no checks whatsoever. Similarly, if you have illegal migration in general, it selects for people who are very likely, more likely than others, even of their fellow compatriots, to commit crimes. They may well be fleeing charges in France or Sweden or wherever, because we've seen that story repeated time and again.
Yeah,
so,
but also, why have those young men, you've got out of Afghanistan, I'm sorry, the women and girls are the people who most need to flee Afghanistan, and it's all young men.
Imagine if our conversation in this country was, say, in relation to Afghan refugees, was about women and children. It would be a very, very different conversation. We all know that's the case.
That
but
said,
again,
I'm still not of the view that
people's
Britain has a
safety.
duty of care to take half of the population of Afghanistan.
No, of course, but at the same time, I think if people, it's clear that the sort of form of asylum that we have has just become illegal migration for primarily young men. It's just it's
and
absurd.
if you had, when people say, well, you don't have safe and legal routes to these people, but other than the interpreters and people who claim to be interpreters, who just let in willy-nilly, as we've seen that problem there. But actually, if you had safe and legal routes, these men probably wouldn't get in. So they'd still be coming in by boats, and then we'd have all the other people.
Which is why you've got to stop the boats, to coin a phrase. I mean, it's so obvious that if you
Why
want...
did no one think of that?
I know, exactly. It's a good slogan, isn't it? Someone could have cooked that up at some point in time.
I suppose you'd have to smash the gangs.
Now there's an idea. But it's one of those things, isn't it, where just on the question of the contempt of people's concerns as well, this level of official secrecy, which haunts the entire kind of Afghan asylum question because of the fact that when you had the pullout from Afghanistan and you had this secretive move to bring Afghans over here, that was completely covered up. You couldn't even report on it, even if you knew about it until very recently. And now we see cases like this being covered up or not talked about under the aegis of sort of reporting restrictions, but it's so clear there is so much public interest in this now that is now breaking down.
But again, there's reporting restrictions.
It's contempt for the public, though. It's not about contempt of court. It's we do not trust you to have this information, and that is
we'll all just go around beating up. But again, the anger after Southport was again that people thought they were being lied to.
Yeah.
That was what it was. I mean, again, there was no excuse. I'm sorry, it was what happened in Southport was awful. There was not a single excuse for anybody to be on the streets with bricks attacking asylum hotels or threatening people or attacking the police. Not one. Not acceptable at all. But again, all right-minded people think that. But again, there also comes a point, and again, most of those people who were convicted of actual violence had records. Huge number of them. They had numerous convictions for assault, for goodness. They were wrong-uns who were just like fancied a ruck on the street, basically. Most of these people. They weren't, ordinary members of the public. But there comes a point when you push people so far, you lie to people so much, and people have had enough. And again, I'm so impressed with the Pink Ladies and their protests at the Epping Hotel that's going around the country. And also, again, this all makes it completely understandable when the thing that never happens keeps happening. Crowborough in East Sussex. This is residents of a small town. They've created what people are saying like vigilante groups. No, this is Community Watch. This is the community in action, basically in response to this Home Office plan, which they keep trying to stop. And there's legal threats, there's everything. They want to house over 500 legal migrants, almost entirely young single men, in a former army barracks. The army barracks has been used by cadets until a week ago. Now they're told, no, you can't use it. It's not safe for you. But apparently completely safe for these people. They're not going to be in the middle of nowhere. They're not going to be fenced in and unable to, they're going to be able to move completely freely. And it's right, literally, here's the town, it's right next to it. It's like a 10, 20-minute walk or something. And people basically, the dads, the husbands, the grandfathers, the right-minded men in the community and women are basically saying, we are going to be mounting patrols at school, coming in and going out hours. We're going to be mounting patrols in the evening. We're going to be making sure the bus stops are safe and outside schools are safe because of the concern. Why are they concerned? Are they just made it up in their head? Are they all just horrible, nasty racists and bigots? No, because this keeps happening. My guess is we don't know about most of the cases where this is happening because it's not being publicised unless we haven't got local papers sitting in every court anymore like we used to. When I was doing my local paper training, I sat in court every day. They're not doing that. They're not seeing the cases. So unless someone goes, oh, by the way, to the media, this case is coming up. You won't know the case has happened. It may not come to court. Most of these cases don't come to court, and you won't know that it was an asylum seeker or where they're from. So God knows, this may be the tip of the iceberg. No,
exactly. And it's one of those things where if you looked at what the government was being briefed a little bit earlier this year, especially when all of the reporting about the Afghan resettlement process programme was finally coming to light, they know that some of the biggest kind of riot hotspots in the summer of 2024 were places which had quite a large amount of people who were coming from Afghanistan in particular, but also from illegal migration routes in general. So it's clear that this has been part of the kind of recipe for unrest. But I think what we've been seeing in Crowborough in relation to these patrols, what we've been seeing outside of the hotels, the Pink Ladies protests and so on, is that this year I think what we've seen is ordinary people really organising in a much more peaceful fashion. I think probably recoiling from what we saw in the summer of 2024, because no one supported that rioting beyond a few idiots. And there was obviously some quite clear-cut racism out on the streets. What has happened now is people say, well, unfortunately, we do have to take matters into our own hands because the state isn't protecting us, but we are doing so peacefully. We're doing so whilst oftentimes explicitly dismissing
no one has
racism,
a problem,
and that is something which I think is
my way, not in my street, by the way. There's a lot of big fancy houses, multi-million-pound houses. They've all got private security patrols, right? They've got a nice little man in his little car that looks a little bit like a police car from a distance, and he drives up and down those roads day and night. Okay, well, no one has a problem with that. This is no different, except they're protecting children and girls,
and they're not
and women. They're not protecting big fancy houses from being.
And there's the Crowborough group. There's also another group in Bournemouth, if I remember correctly, who've been doing something similar. You see reports of this sort of all over the country, in one way or another. And these people aren't walking around with bats and knives and things. They've got a walkie-talkie and a high-vis vest,
so they can contact each other and contact the police.
So, and what do you expect?
Yeah, I know, exactly. But again, it's just, I mean, here's an interesting thing. Kemi Badenoch yesterday, she's done her speech today. She's got busy. She got very busy as Kemi Badenoch. She's done a speech this morning about welfare and the need to sort of tackle welfare benefits, the benefit reform. But yesterday there was a press conference about the grooming gangs inquiry. Basically, we waited. We were all far right for wanting a grooming gangs national inquiry led by a judge. You were far right for wanting that. Suddenly, the Prime Minister went all far right himself and agreed to do one. 6 months on, massive disputes between people trying to run the inquiry, and many of the victims and survivors saying, we don't want it to be this person or that person. They don't want Jess Phillips, the Home Office Minister, involved, etc., etc. But yesterday, one of the things the jury said, they want this inquiry, they want it to be led by a judge. It could be a retired judge, so you can slow down. It doesn't have to take years. You put a 2-year time limit. Again, I think you always need to put a time limit on these things, and it needs to be very specific, and it needs to tackle the issues of, again, the religious and ethnic and national background of these men, largely Pakistani Muslim men from a very particular part of Pakistan, interestingly, and why they were targeting young, largely white girls, and how much that played a role not only in the choice of victim, but also in the failure of the authorities to act, because worries about community cohesion, they claimed. But one of the things they've said is that, foreign sex offenders, many of these have dual nationality. Well, if you've got dual nationality, you're out. You're going back to Pakistan. But also that mosques would have to cooperate with grooming gangs inquiry, and just requiring, the key thing is it have to be a statutory inquiry so that people have to cooperate. And the reality is a lot of these inquiries, people don't cooperate.
No, exactly. You do have to compel them, particularly when there's potential evidence they're going to offer up is so damning, either of themselves or of the institutions that they work with. The scale of this is so horrific. It has gone on for so many decades in this country that
still going on.
It's the combination of some kind of inquiry and some kind of beefed up criminal justice sort of task force to bring as many people to justice, not who simply were the perpetrators of this crime, but also people who covered it up and turned a blind eye in issues of public office, is absolutely necessary to kind of drain this poison out from our body politic. It is something which has absolutely poisoned people's relationship with the state, between different communities, if we're being perfectly frank, the way in which people felt like their concerns weren't being taken seriously.
They didn't feel it. No, they didn't feel it. They weren't. No, they weren't.
And they were quite clearly told that the rape of their own daughters, the rape of their own people within their community mattered less because of race relations, because of multiculturalism. This is actually a horrific state of affairs. Until this nettle is grasped, then it's impossible that we're going to be able to move on from this issue. But no one trusts the Labour government, who, let's be frank, was in charge in many of the areas in which this took place for a very long time. to deal with
the Tories had plenty of time to deal with it and didn't deal with it. That said, to be fair, you know, Kemi Badenoch's been pretty sound on this one. But again, there's comes people still go, yeah, but you did have 14 years. But she's now announced a welfare review. And again, we need a lot of these reviews. The thing about all these things is nothing ever something well happens. You know, that's the thing. Let me talk about the NHS case. There's actually 3 NHS stories actually in the news today. One is this doctors being urged to call off a strike that's coming up just before Christmas, as we've got this big flu bug doing the rounds. And flu is a dangerous disease. You know, it kills people, and indeed, you know, it kills a lot. You know, a couple of years before COVID, it killed, I think, 10,000 plus people over winter. I mean, it's terrible. It's a terrible disease. Yeah, because viruses often kill people, and particularly winter, largely older people, but also sick and frail younger people as well. But this at the same time has got these NHS maternity failings. This investigation by Baroness Amos, which is just initial findings, just 3 months into looking at maternity failings at 12 different NHS trusts, saying, you know, basically women are, you know, being failed, babies are dying, women are suffering lifelong injuries because of poor care. I mean, again, tell us something we don't know. This abject failure of the NHS again and again and again, and nothing being done about it. And at the same time, but they're very, very, very concerned about so-called trans women, i.e. men who identify as women, put on a wig or grow their hair, put on some lipstick, and then say they want to stand in the changing room with women while they're getting out of their pants to change their clothes after a shift. No, I'm sorry. The NHS has completely lost its way. If you have anyone working in any unit, in any hospital in the country where, you know, babies are dying or women are getting bad care and lying in a pool of blood, you know, with their dead baby, and no one cares, with some of these things this report is suggesting, you know, the fact that there's anyone working in the NHS that would allow that to happen, the fact that there's a boss of any unit or a chief executive that would allow that to happen and doesn't sort it out the next day, shows there is a rotten core to this. And yet they're obsessed with rainbow ribbons, net zero, diversity, equity, inclusion, all of that nonsense. And it's very, very important that a doctor who's a man, who calls himself Dr. Beth Upton, even though he's a man, should be allowed to stand in and get changed and watch while other women who are nurses get changed. And it's not a problem. According to a tribunal yesterday, employment tribunal, they ruled that even despite the Supreme Court ruling, that Sandy Peggy did not have a right to not have this man watching her, because he wasn't just standing in the corner going, sorry to bother you, he was watching her, she says, that she didn't have a right for him not to be there, but she did have the right to complain. It was only once you complain that it becomes a problem. Like, no, women shouldn't have to complain. They should never have to confront a man in their women's changing room. That was always the law. It was always common sense. The Supreme Court clarified that in April. What the hell is this employment tribunal judge saying? Well, he did look like he was a woman. He doesn't. Can we put a picture up of Beth Upton? He doesn't look like he's a woman at all. He looks like a man trying to look like a woman.
This is what is so puzzling, to put it lightly, about the Employment Tribunal ruling, which people should know, it's 350 pages long, which implies that it's torturous and probably quite confused, is the idea that, yes, we have the Supreme Court ruling, which clarifies that under the Equality Act, sex means biological sex and so on and so forth. But at the same time, it wasn't necessarily unlawful for your man, Dr. Beth Upton, to be in the women's changing rooms until someone complains about it. And at that point, maybe some process has to take place. Maybe it's not necessarily unlawful because of the fact that he is wearing a dress and has grown his hair out.
But the judge actually said because he had a feminine appearance.
And on the question of what priorities, Fife NHS Trust and Dr. Beth Upton, who I understand have the same representation,
interestingly,
an inordinate amount of money has been spent fighting this case.
By our money.
And it's one of those things where if they'd have just said, you know what, particularly in light of the Supreme Court judgment, obviously this has been working its way through for some time, the Sandy Peggy case, but nevertheless...
It's 2 years.
Let's just say the women's changing rooms are for women and get on with things, then they wouldn't have had to have spent all this time, public money...
But that's not inclusive, Tom.
Well,
no, you laugh, but that's what they think. Genuinely, his feelings that he thinks he's a woman, he knows he's not a woman because he must look down and see what he's got down there and knows he's a doctor. If he doesn't sodding well know he's a man, he shouldn't be practising as a doctor. That should be, seriously, doctoring 101. Is that a man or a woman? If you don't know the answer to that, I do not want you employed, and I definitely don't want to be paying your wages.
Nasty mix-ups
I consider that to be a really basic thing. But then you've got a judge in this tribunal using phrases like assigned female at birth. You're not assigned female birth. When my daughter was born, they didn't go, well, what do you think? Should we let your baby decide when your baby's 6, or should we just have a guess? Should we take a wild stab in the dark?
Or like the midwife just goes,
as the baby got bean to veg. No, it's a girl. Yeah. It's really that simple.
It really is. But as we all know,
I feel strongly about this. You may have gathered.
It's just been captured. And also this idea about inclusivity. First of all, this inclusivity around gender is entirely exclusive of anyone who has even this tiny bit of common sense.
It's not very, it's not inclusive of women who don't want a man to watch them undress.
Single-sex spaces are exclusive by definition. That's the point of them. The idea being that, as we were talking about earlier, it's not to say that all men or all men who think they're women are necessarily a problem, although I think there's a bit of a higher problem when people are so keen to get into women's spaces. That should raise some alarm bells in some instances.
There's a lot on social media of men dressing up as if they're women. They might claim to be trans or think they're trans. I think they just get a kick out. Some of these men just get a kick out of wearing women's clothes, and they film themselves in women's bathrooms because they're getting a sexual kink out of it. Yeah. I'm of the view that they are not safe to be in the same bathroom as me or any other women or girls.
They're exploiting a loophole which our derangement on the trans issue has gifted to them.
When we try to be kind to men who
It's not to say that all, as we were talking about earlier, it's not to say that all men are sex offenders, to say that men shouldn't be in women's changing rooms because of the fact that in that moment you can't tell who is the wrong and who isn't. Similarly, with the whole a man who thinks he's a woman, it doesn't matter if has the best of intentions, rather than being one of these fetishists who's just trying it. In that situation, you can't tell. There's a strength imbalance. There's also a question of dignity. This isn't just purely about safety. It's also about the fact that the women's toilets, women's changing rooms are reserved because of the fact that on that level of just having privacy, particularly at certain periods of life, that's quite important. We all knew this 5 minutes ago. Then we forgot it, started saying things like sex that was assigned at birth, regurgitating activist gobbledygook that, again, no one heard about until they were forced to sit down in some sort of training session which fed them all of this nonsense. And even now you've got tribunal judges who are bending over backwards to try and capitulate to this stuff. You would think after the Supreme Court ruling, a lot of this would just fall back. It's quite clear now that the fight is only really just beginning.
Even the government, even Parliament and the NHS, schools are still not obeying that law, and it's utterly infuriating. I'd love to hear your thoughts on all the stories we're talking about. Give us a call. Lots of messages coming in as well. 0344 499 1000. We are just having a general. Everyone's gone mad, and they need to stop being mad because they're putting people at risk. Whether it's girls getting raped, whether it's women having to change with men watching them in their women's changing rooms, whether it's nutters putting on masks with the virus when the masks don't stop the virus, and it's well documented. I mean, you name it, we're talking about it today. I'd love to hear your